HFY Stories. A stranger's ship, the tale of a lost engineer and a haunted vessel. The stars stretched out like diamonds across an endless black void. The silence of space was deafening, interrupted only by the hum of the ship's engines. The Aspera was a quiet vessel, a warship abandoned after a long-forgotten conflict, left drifting in the outer rim. But despite the peacefulness of the cosmos, there was an unease that lingered in the ship's corridors, like an unseen presence lurking in the shadows. It had been years since anyone had boarded the Aspera, but when the transmission came through, crackling with static from an unknown source, it caught the attention of the Galactic Federation. An old distress beacon, barely operational, had been picked up, originating from the derelict ship. Commander Samara Lark, a veteran of the Federation's Exploration Division, was dispatched to investigate. Along with a small crew, she boarded a sleek new vessel, the Valiant, and set course toward the coordinates. When they arrived, the Aspera loomed ominously before them. Its once pristine surface was now marred with scars of age and neglect, but it was clear that it had been a powerful ship in its prime. Samara and her crew suited up and boarded the vessel, their boots echoing in the metal corridors as they made their way through the abandoned hallways. The ship was cold, unnaturally cold. The air felt heavy, thick with something unexplainable. They found no signs of life, no crew, but the ship felt alive. There was a presence, a strange pull in the air, a lingering force that made every step feel as though they were being watched. In the heart of the ship, they found the bridge. The main console was a jumble of broken controls, but there was a single chair that still faced the viewport. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. And there, in the captain's seat, was the figure of a man. His clothes were tattered, his face gaunt and pale, but his eyes, they were alive. They were wide with a kind of knowing terror. The man, though long dead, seemed to stare right through Samara, as if his soul was still tethered to the vessel. "Who are you?" Samara whispered, unable to tear her gaze away. The figure opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, there was a sudden flicker on the bridge's main console. The screens lit up, showing images of another time, a young engineer, a crew of diverse species, and the ship in its prime, gliding through the stars with purpose. The image shifted. The engineer, now older, looked out at a darkened world. There were flashes of battle, of violence, of war. The crew was lost, the ship was broken, and the engineer's face twisted with guilt, with regret. Then, the transmission began to play. I am the last," the voice said, crackling through the static. "We were caught in the aftermath of a battle. The Aspera, it was haunted, not by ghosts or spirits, but by something far worse, something we brought back with us. We didn't know what we were dealing with. The ship, it was cursed. We tried to leave, but it wouldn't let us, and now, it won't let me leave. I'm trapped here, and I am the last one. If you hear this, please, don't board, don't." The transmission cut off abruptly. Samara stood frozen, a chill running down her spine. She turned to her crew, who stood just as stunned, their faces pale. She had heard rumors of cursed ships before, but nothing like this. A ship that hungered for its crew, that trapped them in time and space, stealing their souls until there was nothing left but the vessel itself. "Commander," one of her crew said in a hushed tone, "we need to go. This place is wrong." But Samara couldn't tear herself away. She had heard the voice of the engineer, felt his desperation. He was a lost soul, a victim of a greater force, and she couldn't leave him behind. "I'm not leaving," Samara said softly, determination in her voice. "We can fix this. We have to." She moved forward, her eyes scanning the ship's old systems. There had to be a way to break the curse, to free the lost engineer's soul from this haunted vessel. As Samara worked, strange things began to happen. The ship groaned under the weight of unseen forces, and the lights flickered with more urgency. The temperature dropped, and a soft whispering sound filled the air. It was as though the ship itself was alive, protesting her presence. But she pushed on, making adjustments to the power systems, rerouting the ship's energy. She didn't know how long it would take, or if it would even work, but she refused to let the Aspera claim another soul. Hours passed, but then, finally, there was a shift. The whispering stopped, the air lightened, and the ship's systems began to stabilize. The haunting presence that had lingered seemed to fade away. The crew watched in awe as the lights returned to their normal brightness. The temperature rose to a comfortable level, and the console screens cleared. Samara stepped back, breathing a sigh of relief. And then, she turned back to the captain's seat. The figure was gone. But there was something new, a small, glowing object resting in the chair. Samara approached it cautiously and picked it up. It was a pendant, simple but beautiful, engraved with the emblem of the ship's original crew. The engineer's spirit had finally found peace. As Samara and her crew left the Aspera, the ship seemed to settle into a calm, peaceful state, no longer burdened by the haunting presence that had gripped it for so long. The lost engineer had been freed, and with him, the cursed vessel had found its end. The Aspera would no longer drift in the emptiness of space. Its story, a warning, would be told across the stars, a reminder that some things, once broken, should never be touched again. And as Samara stared out at the stars from the Valiant, she knew one thing for sure: the universe was vast, but it was not as empty as it seemed. There were things out there, stories, spirits, and souls that had yet to be discovered. And she would be ready for them. HFY Stories, A Stranger's Ship, the tale of a lost engineer and a haunted vessel, continued. The Valiant returned to Federation space, carrying with it the story of the Aspera. The crew remained silent, lost in thought, haunted by the events they had witnessed. Samara couldn't shake the image of the lost engineer's eyes, still wide with a terror that had transcended death. She had seen the raw weight of his regret, a feeling all too familiar to her, a burden that never quite left the soul. The Federation was quick to seal off the Aspera, locking it away in a remote sector. No one was allowed near it again. The distress beacon was disabled, and the ship was quarantined. But Samara knew that such things rarely stayed buried forever. The universe had a way of pulling people into its mysteries, whether they were ready or not. Weeks passed, and life aboard the Valiant returned to its normal rhythms. But Samara found herself restless. She spent hours poring over the data they had gathered on the Aspera, combing through every transmission, every log, looking for something, anything, that could explain what had truly happened on that ship. One night, as she reviewed the old records in the quiet of her office, a familiar voice crackled through her comms, breaking the silence. "Commander Lark," the voice said, distorted and faint, but unmistakable. "I thought I told you not to come back." Samara's heart skipped a beat. She bolted upright from her chair, her mind racing. It couldn't be. The Aspera was supposed to be silent now. No transmissions were supposed to come from it. But the voice continued, now more urgent, more pleading. "Listen to me. You need to understand. The ship is not finished with me. I didn't break the curse. It's still here. It's still waiting. And it wants more. You have to stop it before it consumes everything." The transmission ended abruptly, and Samara was left in stunned silence. She didn't know if it was another trick of the ship's strange energy, or if the engineer had somehow managed to send out one last desperate message. Without wasting any more time, Samara quickly gathered her team and returned to the Aspera, determined to solve the mystery once and for all. They arrived at the derelict ship once more, and Samara felt that same chill in the air. The haunted presence was back, thicker than ever. The crew, though hesitant, followed her orders, but Samara couldn't help but feel that they weren't the ones in charge anymore. The Aspera was alive in a way no ship had any right to be. This time, they ventured deeper into the ship, toward the ship's engine room, where the anomaly had originated. They discovered that the engine itself was far from ordinary. It was an ancient, intricate machine that had been corrupted by something far older and darker than any technology they'd ever encountered. Whatever had powered the Aspera during its prime had become unstable, feeding off the souls of its crew, twisting its purpose. The engineer's log came back to Samara's mind. "We brought it back. We didn't know what we were dealing with." What had they unleashed? The crew worked quickly, dismantling parts of the engine and attempting to cut off its power source. But as they did, the ship responded violently. Lights flickered, the floor trembled beneath their feet, and the air turned freezing cold again. The ship groaned, its metal hull creaking like a living thing in agony. Suddenly, the presence in the ship became overwhelming. A shadow formed at the far end of the corridor, flickering in and out of existence. The engineer, or what remained of him, stood there, his form translucent and flickering like a hologram, his eyes hollow with terror. "You don't understand," the engineer's voice echoed in their minds, his image warping as if struggling to hold its shape. "The Aspera is feeding. It's too strong now. It's too late. There's nothing you can do to stop it. It wants more." Samara's heart pounded. This wasn't just a ship, it was a sentient force, twisted by years of sorrow, guilt, and something far worse. It wanted to grow, to consume, to become something more than it ever was. But Samara couldn't allow that. She felt a surge of determination. The Federation had created the Aspera, and it was their duty to fix what had gone wrong. If there was one thing the Federation could do, it was face the impossible, and Samara was no stranger to impossible odds. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered to the flickering image of the engineer. "We'll finish this. I promise." Samara turned to her crew. "We need to cut the power to the heart of this thing. All of it. We need to sever its connection to the core." They made their way through the ship, battling against the presence that grew more powerful by the second. The lights flickered violently, and the walls seemed to pulse as if the ship was breathing. They finally reached the core chamber, a vast, open space dominated by the ship's engine, a monstrous, blackened machine, its power swirling like a storm in the heart of the vessel. It was a sentient engine, a heart that had been corrupted, and now, Samara knew, it was feeding on whatever was left. "We cut the main power source," Samara commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Then we overload the engine. We have to destroy the heart of the Aspera." Her crew worked quickly, their hands steady despite the chaos, but as they began the countdown, the ship seemed to scream. The lights went out completely, the walls shook violently. Then, with a final surge of energy, the heart of the Aspera exploded in a burst of energy, engulfing the entire ship. For a moment, everything was dark. When the lights flickered back on, the Aspera was silent. No more voices, no more haunting presence. Just the cold void of space. Samara took a deep breath. The curse had been broken. The Aspera was no more. But she knew this wouldn't be the last time the Federation would face something like this. The universe was vast, filled with mysteries and forces that no one could fully understand. But there was one thing she knew for certain now: humanity would face it all. They would never stop exploring. They would never stop fighting. And they would never be alone in the dark. The galaxy had its ghosts, its mysteries, and its lost stories, but humanity had something more: determination, ingenuity, and an unyielding will to survive. "Prepare for departure," Samara ordered, her eyes set on the stars ahead. "There's more to see." HFY Stories, A Stranger's Ship: The Tale of a Lost Engineer and a Haunted Vessel, continued. The Valiant drifted through the silent expanse of space, leaving the wreckage of the Aspera behind. Samara stood at the bridge's helm, her fingers lightly tracing the controls. The crew was still reeling from the events they had just witnessed, but she could feel the weight of something new settling on her shoulders, an unknown future. The Aspera was gone, but its story wasn't over. It had been one chapter in a much larger book of mysteries, and Samara had a sinking feeling that the Federation's work wasn't finished with what they had uncovered. A new transmission broke the quiet, pulling Samara from her thoughts. It was a short, simple message, one that no one on the bridge had expected. "Commander Lark, this is Dr. Avellini Core. I need to speak with you immediately. It's about the Aspera." Dr. Core was a brilliant scientist and expert on ancient technologies. Samara's first instinct was to dismiss the message as just another follow-up, a routine inquiry. But there was something in Dr. Core's tone that made Samara pause, something in the message that felt urgent. "We'll divert course," Samara said, her voice firm, a sense of purpose rising within her. "Plot a course for Dr. Core's coordinates. Let's see what she knows." Within hours, the Valiant arrived at a remote research station orbiting an uninhabited planet on the outer rim. Dr. Core greeted them as they docked, her usually composed demeanor uncharacteristically anxious. "Commander Lark," she said, her eyes scanning the crew. "You've encountered something far more dangerous than you realize. The Aspera, it wasn't just cursed. It was a vessel designed to carry something else." Samara narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Dr. Core led her to a small room at the center of the research station. Holographic displays flickered to life as she activated the archives, bringing up records on the Aspera's design, files that had been classified, erased from Federation databases, and hidden from the public for decades. The ship was far older than anyone had realized, predating the Federation by centuries. It's not just a warship, Dr. Core explained. The Aspera was built by an ancient race known as the Alarith, a long-extinct species that had mastered energy manipulation, capable of harnessing forces beyond our comprehension. The ship was a prototype, a vessel designed to carry a power source that could manipulate space itself. Space manipulation? Samara asked, feeling a chill run down her spine. Are you telling me the Aspera was a weapon? More than that, Dr. Core continued, her voice heavy with dread. It was a containment vessel. It carried something inside it, an entity, a being that existed outside of normal reality. The crew wasn't just trapped by the ship. They were caught in a war between this entity and the ship itself. And whatever it was, it's still out there. Samara's pulse quickened. So the ship didn't just fall victim to a curse. It was trying to hold back something worse? Dr. Core nodded gravely. Exactly. The ship was never meant to be a weapon of war. It was built to contain an ancient force, one that had been sealed away by the Alarith. But over time, the energy of that being began to seep into the ship itself. The Aspera became the prison, and the prison's walls started to break down. Samara thought back to the final moments aboard the Aspera, when the energy from the ship had surged in a final, desperate attempt to feed on them. And the engineer, the last crew member, he was trying to stop it, wasn't he? Yes, Dr. Core confirmed. He was the final piece, the one who held the entity back, trying to hold on to his sanity while the ship fell apart. But the creature, the entity inside the Aspera, was too powerful. It couldn't be destroyed so easily. The weight of the situation settled over Samara like a dark cloud. The ship, the entity, and now the Federation was entangled in a web far more complicated than they could have imagined. What do you want from me, Dr. Core? Samara asked, her voice steady. I need your help, Dr. Core said, her eyes meeting Samara's. There's a reason the Federation covered up the Aspera's true origins. There's a reason the entity is still a threat, and if we don't act fast, the entire galaxy could be in danger. What do you mean? Samara asked, alarm rising in her chest. The Aspera was just the beginning, Dr. Core said, stepping closer. The Alarith didn't just create one ship. They built many vessels capable of holding different entities, all with unique powers. The Aspera was the first, but there are others out there, scattered across the galaxy. If the Federation doesn't find them before someone else does, we could be facing a catastrophe unlike anything we've ever seen. Samara felt the weight of the decision ahead of her. Her mission had been to investigate a haunted ship, a ghost story in the depths of space. Now, she stood on the precipice of something far more dangerous, an ancient war between unimaginable forces, hidden away by those who had long since vanished. We'll find the other ships, Samara said, her voice resolute, and we'll stop whatever's coming. Dr. Core nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. I hope we're ready for what we'll find. The galaxy, it seemed, was far older and far more dangerous than anyone had known. The Aspera had been a warning, but it was only the beginning of something much larger. As Samara stood on the deck of the Valiant once more, staring into the stars, she knew that her crew was about to face a new kind of enemy, an enemy that had been hidden in the darkness for millennia. And humanity would have to stand against it. Not with ghosts, not with curses, but with ingenuity, courage, and a refusal to let the darkness win. Set course for the next sector, Samara commanded, her voice cutting through the air like steel. It's time to find the next ship. And as the Valiant sped into the stars, Samara couldn't shake the feeling that whatever awaited them out there in the cold expanse of space, they were ready to face it. The universe had its secrets, but humanity had its own story, and it was only just beginning. HFY Stories, A Stranger's Ship, the tale of a lost engineer and a haunted vessel, continued. The Valiant hurtled through the vast darkness of space, its engines glowing faintly against the backdrop of stars. Commander Samara Lark stood at the bridge's helm, her fingers lightly touching the console as she gazed out into the void. She had always found comfort in the stars, their cold, silent beauty. But now, with Dr. Core's revelation weighing on her mind, The cosmos felt less like a place of wonder and more like an uncharted maze, filled with hidden dangers and unknown threats. Her crew worked diligently, following the course laid out by Dr. Core's analysis, heading toward the next sector where another of the Alarith's mysterious ships was rumored to be hidden. The idea that there were more ships like the Aspera, each carrying an ancient entity, sent a chill through her. What other horrors had the Alarith sealed away? And more importantly, why had they built these vessels in the first place? Commander, Lieutenant Rios's voice broke through her thoughts. We're approaching the coordinates Dr. Core provided. It's a desolate moon orbiting a gas giant. Nothing but ruins on the surface. Samara nodded, snapping to attention. Prepare for landing. I want full scans of the surface. We're not walking into another trap. Understood. Rios responded, his hands moving swiftly over the control panel. The Valiant descended through the atmosphere of the desolate moon, its engines humming steadily as the crew focused on their mission. The surface was bleak, an endless stretch of gray stone, dotted with craters and jagged peaks, nothing alive for miles. It looked eerily similar to the planet the Aspera had drifted near before its final demise. As the ship landed, the crew suited up in their environment gear. Samara's mind raced. The Aspera had been a warning, and every step they took now could lead them to an even darker secret buried beneath the surface. But they couldn't afford hesitation. The stakes were too high. Stay sharp, Samara ordered as the crew filed out of the Valiant and onto the cold, barren surface. We don't know what we're walking into. The team made their way across the rocky terrain toward the coordinates Dr. Core had provided. There was no sign of life, no vegetation, no animals, not even the faintest hint of atmospheric pressure, just ancient ruins, their structures eroded by time and neglect. These ruins don't match anything from known civilizations, Dr. Core said, her voice betraying her growing unease. They predate even the Alarith. This isn't just alien, this is something older. Samara raised an eyebrow. Older than the Alarith? How old are we talking? 1,000 millennia, maybe more, Core replied. If the Alarith were a response to this earlier civilization, then their motives might not have been as we understood. The unsettling thought hung in the air. If the Alarith had been driven to create ships capable of containing beings with unimaginable power, what had their creators been trying to contain? What had they been running from? As they navigated through the ruins, a large structure emerged from the rubble, a vast, cylindrical shape half buried in the dirt. Its surface covered in intricate carvings that pulsed with an ethereal glow. It was unmistakably alien, and yet, it radiated a familiar energy, the same energy Samara had felt aboard the Aspera. There it is, Dr. Core whispered, her face pale. This is what the Alarith tried to seal away. The crew gathered around, their steps slow and deliberate as they approached the structure. The air seemed to grow thicker with each step, as if something unseen was watching them, waiting for them to make the wrong move. Get the scanners running, Samara ordered, her voice steady. We need to know what's inside before we make any decisions. The scanners hummed to life, sweeping over the structure. Samara's eyes narrowed as the readout appeared on the screen. The energy signature was unmistakable, the same as the Aspera's core. This is it, Samara said softly. Another one of their containment vessels. We need to destroy it, Lieutenant Rios said, his voice urgent. If this thing is active, we can't let it fall into the wrong hands. Not so fast, Samara said, holding up a hand. We don't know what's inside. We have to be careful. As the crew prepared to investigate further, a soft hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The ground trembled beneath them, and the structure seemed to pulse with life. The glow of the carvings intensified, casting long, twisted shadows over the ruined landscape. Commander, Dr. Core said, her voice rising in panic. Something's wrong. It's reacting to us. Before anyone could react, a low, guttural sound echoed from the depths of the structure. The ground beneath their feet cracked open, revealing a swirling vortex of energy, pulling at the air around them. A shape began to materialize from the void, a massive, shadowy figure, its form shifting and distorting like smoke. It was vast, far larger than any human or alien being should have been, and yet, it was somehow wrong, an unnatural distortion of space and time. The air grew cold, the light from their suits flickering, as if the very fabric of reality was warping in its presence. Get back, Samara shouted, her instincts kicking in as she shoved Dr. Core behind her. Move. Now. The crew scrambled, but the figure was already too close. It loomed above them, its presence suffocating, its form unfathomable. Its eyes, or what could be called eyes, glowed with a sickly yellow light, fixing on Samara as if it knew her, as if it had been waiting for her. Do not disturb the containment. A voice boomed from the figure, a voice that was not spoken but felt in their minds. You should have never come. Before Samara could issue another command, the figure reached out with an appendage made of swirling energy and twisted light. The very air seemed to buckle under its touch, and the ground below them began to collapse into the vortex. Commander, we can't fight this, Rios yelled, backing away. We need to. I know, Samara snapped, her mind racing, but we can't let it escape. If this thing gets free. Suddenly, Dr. Core stepped forward, her face resolute. The containment mechanism, it's still active. We need to reset it, or the energy will continue to destabilize. If we don't, it'll break free completely. Samara felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. There was no time to hesitate. They needed to act, and fast. All right, Samara barked. We'll reset the containment, but we need to do it now. Everyone, cover Dr. Core. The team sprang into action, their weapons drawn, keeping the massive entity at bay as Dr. Core worked frantically at a control panel hidden among the ruins. The air around them shimmered with energy, and the ground continued to shake. But Samara's focus was unshakable. This was their only chance. Dr. Core's fingers flew across the console, inputting commands as the swirling vortex began to pulse faster, louder, its roar shaking their bones. Then, with a deafening crack, the containment system re-engaged. The massive figure let out a shriek that tore at the air around them, its form flickering and distorting. It struggled against the energy that held it back, but it was too late. The containment vessel sealed shut once more. For a long moment, the crew stood in stunned silence, the air still and heavy with the tension of what had just transpired. Samara's heart raced in her chest, her body on the verge of collapse from the sheer force of the encounter. But they had done it. They had contained the entity. Dr. Core let out a shaky breath, her face pale. It's over. Not yet, Samara said quietly. There are more of these things out there. We've only just begun. HFY Stories, A Stranger's Ship, the tale of a lost engineer and a haunted vessel, continued. The Valiant surged back into the cold expanse of space, leaving the desolate moon and its forgotten horrors behind. Samara stood at the bridge, her mind still racing. The containment on the Alarith vessel had been successful, but she knew it wasn't over. That entity wasn't the only one. It was only a matter of time before they encountered another. Commander, Rios's voice brought her out of her thoughts. We've received a signal from Federation Command. They want an immediate debrief. Samara sighed, rubbing her eyes. Send it through. The screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Admiral Kessler. The older man's features were lined with worry, and his voice was tight with urgency. Commander Lark, the Admiral began, his tone clipped. I trust you're aware of the severity of the situation. The Federation has been monitoring the events surrounding the Aspira and now this new discovery. We need more than just reports. We need answers. We've barely begun to understand what we're dealing with, Samara replied, her voice steady. The ship we encountered, the entity it contained, is only one of many, and they're not just ancient artifacts, they're weapons. Understood, Kessler responded, his eyes narrowing. But I'm concerned about the Federation's involvement. We need to be prepared for what comes next. Our resources are stretched thin, and there are other threats out there that could complicate things. If you need assistance, make it clear. I will, Samara said. But right now, I need more intel. There's something deeper at play here. Whoever built these containment vessels, they weren't just trying to keep the entities locked away. They were trying to stop something far worse from escaping. The Admiral fell silent, his expression hardening. I'll send you the resources you need, but make no mistake, if these entities are part of a larger pattern, we can't afford to waste time. We won't, Samara said, locking eyes with the screen. We'll find every one of these vessels, and we'll make sure they stay sealed. With that, the transmission ended, and the Valiant fell back into its routine, But Samara couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Every mystery they uncovered seemed to raise more questions than answers. Rios approached her, his face tense. "Commander, there's another signal. It's faint, but it's coming from a nearby system, one that hasn't been explored in centuries." "Plot a course," Samara ordered. "Let's see what's out there." As the Valiant made its way to the new coordinates, the crew braced for whatever they might encounter. Samara stood by the observation deck, watching as the stars streaked past in a blur of light. The weight of her responsibilities pressed down on her, but she refused to let fear take hold. The Federation had entrusted her with this mission, and she would see it through, no matter the cost. The system they arrived at was unlike any they had seen before, a binary star system, its planets locked in an eternal dance of gravitational pull. The signal came from one of the moons orbiting the second star, a small rocky satellite with an ancient, heavily eroded structure on its surface. "It's another one," Dr. Kor said, her voice tight with dread. "This one looks older than the last, though. We need to approach with extreme caution." Samara nodded. "Agreed. This time, we don't make the same mistakes." They touched down on the surface, the eerie silence of the moon settling over them as they disembarked. The air was thin, barely breathable, but the ruins ahead drew them in with an unnatural pull. The structure was vast, far more intricate than anything they'd seen before, carved out of the very rock itself, as if it had been here long before the stars had begun to burn. "This is different," Lieutenant Rios said, his voice hushed. "It almost feels alive." As they moved deeper into the ruins, the temperature began to drop, and the air grew heavier, as though something was shifting around them. They reached the center of the structure, where a massive obelisk stood, covered in alien symbols that glowed faintly with an ethereal light. "This is the source of the signal," Dr. Kor said, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. "These markings, they're from the same civilization that built the vessels. But this is something else." Samara stepped forward, placing a hand on the surface of the obelisk. A jolt of energy surged through her, and for a moment, she felt her mind slip into a strange, altered state. Visions flashed before her eyes. She saw the Alarith, not as they were now, but in their prime, wielding powers far beyond anything the Federation could understand. She saw them building the vessels, sealing away the entities, and then, something else, a presence, something more ancient, more powerful, something they had been trying to escape. The vision ended abruptly, and Samara staggered back, her breath shallow. She glanced around at her crew, who seemed to have experienced something similar, their faces pale and tense. What was that?" Rios asked, his voice shaking. Dr. Kor's face was pale. "That was a warning. This structure, it's not just a containment vessel. It's a beacon, a message from the past, warning us of something that the Alarith feared even more than the entities, something that might be waking up." Samara's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" "The entities, they were never the real threat," Dr. Kor said quietly. "The Alarith sealed them away. But what they were really trying to contain was something older, something that predated them, something that is still out there." Samara's pulse quickened. "We need to find out what it is, and stop it, before it finds us first." As the team worked to extract data from the obelisk, a tremor shook the ground beneath their feet. The walls of the ancient structure groaned, as if awakening from a long slumber. "It's starting," Samara muttered, the urgency of the situation overwhelming. "We have to move, now." The crew quickly gathered their equipment, retreating back toward the Valiant. The ground continued to rumble, the structure seemingly shifting with each passing second. But they were too late. The sky above darkened, and a low, resonating hum filled the air, emanating from deep within the moon itself. A strange, shifting energy rose from the surface, warping the stars overhead. Something had awakened, something old, and it wasn't finished yet. "Commander," Rios said, his voice strained, "the Valiant is being pulled toward the structure. We need to break free." Samara didn't hesitate. "Full throttle, get us out of here." As the ship's engines roared to life, the Valiant shot away from the surface, but it was too late. The energy from the moon's core surged, and a massive wave of energy shot toward them. The stars twisted as time and space themselves bent and warped. The galaxy was changing, and Samara could only hold on as the storm of ancient forces rushed toward them. To be continued. HFY Stories, A Stranger's Ship, the tale of a lost engineer and a haunted vessel, continued. The Valiant soared through the distortion, the ship's hull groaning as the fabric of reality itself seemed to warp around them. Samara Lark gripped the armrest of her seat, her mind racing. They were caught in the gravitational pull of something ancient, something powerful beyond comprehension. The energy surge from the moon had hit them with the force of a cosmic shockwave, and they were struggling to break free. "Commander, the systems are failing," Rios shouted from the control panel, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to regain control of the Valiant. "I can't stabilize the ship. We're being pulled deeper into the anomaly." Samara's heart pounded as the stars outside the viewport shifted, spinning and folding in impossible directions. She had read about such phenomena, ancient technologies capable of manipulating space-time, but seeing it firsthand was a different experience altogether. "Dr. Core," Samara barked, turning to the scientist who was already rushing to a nearby console. "What the hell did we just activate?" Core's face was pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. I'm not sure. The structure, it was more than just a beacon. It's some kind of portal. It's drawing us in, pulling us toward whatever lies beyond." Samara's mind raced. The Alarith had been trying to contain something. But what if their warning had been more than just a simple precaution? What if the entities were only one part of a larger, much darker force that had been lying dormant for millennia? "Can you stop it?" Samara asked, voice sharp. "I don't know," Core replied, her voice tight with tension. "But if we don't stop it, the Valiant will be pulled into whatever is beyond the portal, and it won't just be us. The entire system could be swallowed by it." The ship lurched again, and Samara's stomach dropped. They were getting closer. "All hands brace for impact," Samara shouted, gripping the armrest with both hands as the Valiant shuddered violently. The lights flickered, and alarms blared across the bridge. "We can't fight the pull," Rios yelled, his knuckles white on the control panel. "The engines are failing. We're..." Before he could finish, the ship was hit by a massive jolt. The entire crew was thrown from their seats as the Valiant was sucked into the event horizon of the portal. The hull of the ship creaked and groaned under the immense pressure. But Samara had no time to react. Everything around her dissolved into a whirl of light and color. And then, silence. For a long moment, Samara couldn't tell whether she was still alive or if she had entered some strange, uncharted part of existence. The bridge was still intact, but the stars outside had vanished. Instead, there was only a swirling darkness, a void that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. "Commander," Rios's voice came from behind her, weak and strained. We made it through. But, where are we?" Samara slowly unstrapped herself from her seat and stood. She felt a strange pressure on her chest, like a weight pressing down on her from all sides. The usual hum of the Valiant's engines was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to permeate everything. The stars were gone. The system they had just left was nowhere to be found. "We're not in our galaxy anymore," Samara said, her voice hollow as she stared at the viewport. The darkness outside seemed to stretch endlessly, swirling with faint, distant lights that had no stars to surround them. This wasn't space as they knew it. This was something else. Dr. Core approached, her face a mix of awe and terror. "This is impossible. We've entered a completely different realm, beyond our understanding. There's no way to track our position, no way to navigate back. We're lost." "We're not lost," Samara said, determination hardening in her voice. "We're just somewhere else, and we need to figure out what we're dealing with. If the Alaritha's warning was right, then this place is the heart of whatever ancient force they were trying to keep hidden." Rios looked at Samara, fear evident in his eyes. "Commander, if this is what I think it is, we're in a place where no ship has ever traveled. We don't know what rules govern this space, if there are any rules at all." "We're about to find out," Samara replied. "We need to establish contact with Federation Command. They'll have to help us navigate back. And in the meantime, we need to figure out what we're dealing with here." The crew moved quickly, scanning their surroundings and trying to access any data from the ship's systems. But no matter what they tried, the signals seemed to get lost in the endless void around them. Then, a voice, soft, low, and resonating, echoed through the ship. "You should not have come." Everyone froze. The voice wasn't coming from any external speakers or communication systems, it was inside their heads, resonating deep within their minds. Samara felt her heart race, her mind scrambling to make sense of what had just happened. What was that? Lieutenant Rios whispered, his voice trembling. It's alive. Dr. Core whispered, her eyes wide with horror. The entities. They're here, whatever they are. They're not just sealed away. They're watching us. A deep, vibrating hum filled the ship as the voice returned, louder this time, a presence pushing against the crew's thoughts. You are intruders. Samara felt the words curl around her consciousness like tendrils, pulling at the very core of her being. It was as if the voice wasn't just speaking to her, but through her, reaching into her very soul. No, Samara snapped, fighting against the voice's pull. We are not intruders. We're here to stop whatever you're planning. We're not your enemies. The voice seemed to pause for a moment, as if considering her words. You are too late. The ship shuddered, and the walls began to glow with an unnatural, pulsating light. A deep rumble echoed through the Valiant, and Samara could feel the ship vibrating beneath her feet, like a warning bell. We need to get out of here, Rios shouted, his voice panicked. It's not safe. It's too powerful. No, Samara said, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. We're not running. We're going to find out what this thing is, and we're going to stop it. If the Alarith sealed it away, it wasn't just for us, it was for everyone. We can't let it escape. As the ship continued to vibrate, the light within the walls intensified, and the air seemed to crackle with static. There was something about the atmosphere, something unnatural, that made it hard to breathe. Commander, Dr. Core shouted, panic evident in her voice. The energy in here is like nothing I've ever seen. It's building up to a catastrophic level. We don't have much time, Samara said, a plan beginning to form in her mind. We need to find the heart of whatever this is and destroy it, before it destroys us. But before she could issue another order, the voice returned, louder, more forceful. You cannot stop what has already begun. And then, the ship's lights went out completely. In the pitch-black void of this strange realm, Samara Lark knew one thing for certain: the battle for survival had just begun. To be continued.